It's World War I, and a German soldier is sent out to look for enemy soldiers and capture them so they can be interrogated, and if necessary, tortured and even killed by the Germans. He follows his superior's orders and searches the area only to find one enemy soldier sitting and eating bread by a bonfire. As soon as the enemy soldier notices the armed German soldier in front of him, he realizes he's in trouble. His options are limited, and making the wrong move could be fatal. He could perhaps reach out for his rifle and try to shoot him, or he could try to run away, but both are too risky. Instead, for some reason, without thinking too much about it, he smiles at the German soldier and offers him some bread. This saves his life. The German soldier is so affected by this that he not only doesn't hurt the enemy soldier, he turns away and leaves without apprehending him. This is known as the reciprocation principle, and it states that as human beings, we feel obligated to repay those who have been kind to us, or in this particular situation, at the very least not hurt and capture them. Remember how you felt when someone who wasn't that close to you congratulated you the day of your birthday. This likely made you want to congratulate them the day of their birthday, or perhaps express your gratitude in some other way. This applies to almost everything. If a friend offers to buy you lunch, next time you eat out together, you'll want to pay for his lunch. If someone invites you over to their party, you'll want to invite them to your party. These are all examples of the reciprocation rule. We don't like to feel like we're in debt, so we naturally want to repay those who have done something nice for us. There's nothing wrong with that, but one has to be careful with those using the rule of reciprocation to manipulate us. I say that because the reciprocation principle works even when people don't want what is being given to them. If someone does something nice for you, even if you didn't want them to, you become an easier target to manipulate. In other words, you become more likely to say yes when they ask for something of you. Take a man buying a woman a drink at a bar. If she accepts the drink, she might unconsciously feel obligated to go home with him at the end of the night, even if she doesn't really like him. With that said, be cautious, but don't be paranoid. Not everyone is trying to manipulate you. I like to buy my friends lunch every now and then because I want to, not because I want something in return. But if you think someone is doing something nice for you to manipulate you, before they have the chance to ask for something of you, repay them in any way you see fit. Do something nice for them or give them some gift. This will pay your debt and even things out. In other words, it won't be as hard for you to say no if they ask for something of you that you don't want to do. During the month of December, toy companies sell a lot of toys without too much effort because Christmas is just around the corner, and parents buy their children toys for the holiday. The problem toy companies face is that sales are low in the following months. There's no reason for parents to buy their children toys in January and February, unless they promise to buy their children a specific toy for Christmas that they couldn't find in December. In November and December, toy companies heavily advertise and hype up a toy to make sure every child wants it. Children tell their parents they want that specific toy for Christmas, but because it's almost Christmas, if that specific toy isn't available, parents won't leave the store empty-handed. They will buy their children some other toy, and toy companies are well aware of this. In order to keep selling a decent amount of toys in the following months after December, they undersupply stores with the toy all these children want in order for it to sell out quickly and to force parents to return for it in January and February, when sales are naturally low. This is a win for toy companies and for children because toy companies earn more money and children get more toys. The ones who lose are the parents, as they end up spending more money on toys, but it doesn't matter because they promised their children they would buy them a specific toy, and they don't want to break that promise. This is an example of the commitment and consistency principle in action. This principle states that we want to be consistent with what we said we would do or what we already did. In other words, we feel obligated to keep our word and act according to it. And when it comes to a promise a parent made to his child, toy companies know that this is especially important because parents want to teach their children to be responsible and to keep their word, so they have to teach by example. For survival reasons, human beings fear standing out too much from everyone else. We don't want people to think we're foolish or crazy, so we follow the crowd. We dress and behave like everyone else, and we even buy the same things. The third weapon of influence is social proof, and it basically says that human beings mirror each other's behavior. Marketing experts use the social proof principle all the time to sell products. They know that people are more likely to buy a product if everyone else is buying it, which is why if a product says bestseller, people are more likely to buy it. Of course, this label doesn't guarantee that the product is good, but for most people, this label or others that tell them more people are buying it is good enough because they don't like to think too much, and doing research is too much of a hassle, so simply buying what others are buying without thinking too much about it is the easiest thing to do. With that said, buying what others are buying isn't necessarily something bad. Popular products are very often really good, but acting and reacting like those around you can have very severe consequences. It could cost you your life. In one experiment, subjects were instructed to fill out a questionnaire in a room. After a few minutes, smoke started coming in, but whether or not the subjects stood up and left the room upon noticing the smoke depended on whether or not there were other people answering a questionnaire in the room with them. In one version of the experiment, there was only one person in the room when smoke started coming in. Upon noticing the smoke, the individual stood up and walked out of the room almost immediately to inform the person in charge about the smoke. In the second version of the experiment, there were 3 people answering the questionnaire in the same room at the same time. Upon noticing the smoke, the 3 subjects looked at each other, realized that no one was panicking, and went back to the questionnaire. These people stood up and left after about 6 minutes, when there was so much smoke that they could no longer see the questionnaire in front of their faces. People often act and react like those around them because they fear looking foolish. In this situation, neither of the 3 subjects wanted to be the one who made a fool out of himself for overreacting, so it makes sense that they all kept calm when the smoke started coming in. Thank God, this was just an experiment, but had this been a real emergency, these 3 people might have lost their lives. The next time you fear looking foolish around other people, remember that most people around you are fools themselves, so follow your intuition instead of the masses. It just might save your life. Let's look at another example. In 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese arrived home from work at about 3 a.m. when a man stabbed her right in front of her apartment complex. The attacker ran away when she screamed for help, but no one came to her rescue. The attacker returned, stabbed her again, and stole her money. 38 people witnessed this, but no one came to her rescue or called the police. In this situation, the witnesses did the same thing the 3 people answering the questionnaire did. They looked at each other, realized that no one was doing anything, so they didn't do anything either, although this time it was a little different. They all thought someone else would come to the rescue or at the very least call the police, so they didn't feel pressured to do it themselves. In a crowd, people are less likely to help someone in need. Everyone thinks someone else will eventually help, so no one does. So the next time you see someone asking for help in the street, consider being the one who stops to help them, because chances are no one else will. And if you are the one who needs help in a crowded place, point to a specific individual close to you and tell him or her to help you. Say something like, "Hey you, the tall blonde guy in the red shirt, I think I'm having a heart attack, call 911. The 4th weapon of influence is liking. We are more likely to let ourselves be influenced by those we like, and we tend to like those who are similar to us and those who flatter us. In other words, if the person requesting something of us is similar to us in some way, in the way they're dressed, the things they like, if they have similar ideas or similar beliefs, or if they throw us a compliment here and there, we tend to put our guard down. Salespeople are trained to get us to like them. They might tell us they were born in the same city, or they might like the same sport or have similar habits. They might tell us they like something we're wearing. No matter how likable they are and how good they make you feel, don't let them manipulate you into making a decision you will later regret. Remember, they told something similar to the person that came before you. Beware of those who happen to be very similar to you, especially if they're trying to sell you something or want you to do something. We also like people who seem to be trying to help us. For example, when a client likes a car but says it's too expensive, car salespeople will often pretend to be fighting with their boss for the client's benefit. Come on, this guy is great and he really wants the car. He just can't pay X amount for it. We can offer him a better deal, can't we? The good cop, bad cop strategy is not too different. When trying to get a confession from a suspect, bad cop explicitly shows his dislike for him. He might tell him how much he hates people like him, and that he deserves to rot in jail for the rest of his life for what he did. Good cop, on the other hand, seems to understand why the suspect did what he did and where he's coming from. Good cop is on his side, and once bad cop has left the interrogation room, he tells him he will do his best to lower his jail sentence if he confesses, and they usually do. A researcher wants to know if punishment can improve memory and learning, and he needs 2 volunteers. Volunteer 1 is instructed to memorize pairs of words from a long list, while Volunteer 2 is there to help the researcher carry out the study by following his instructions. Volunteer 1 is tied up to a chair and will be asked to recall the different pairs of words from the list, but for every mistake he makes, he will be given a gentle electric shock by Volunteer 2. The experiment starts off well, but Volunteer 1 makes a mistake and is shocked. The study keeps going, but as he makes more and more mistakes, the shocks get stronger and stronger and very painful. Volunteer 1 says he doesn't want to keep going with the study and tells the researcher and Volunteer 2 that he wants to leave, but to no avail. The researcher says the study won't stop until the end. This is bad news for Volunteer 1, but also Volunteer 2, who thinks the study is very unethical and wants to stop torturing Volunteer 1. But because the researcher tells him to keep delivering the shocks, he does. Volunteer 1 tells them he will stop talking, but the researcher doesn't put an end to the study. In fact, he tells Volunteer 2 to shock him if he stays silent. The study keeps going even after Volunteer 1 begins to cry and scream for help. It keeps going even when he tells them he has a heart problem, and the shocks will worsen his condition. Something like this actually happened, although it wasn't as unethical as it seems. Volunteer 1, the man receiving the shocks, was actually just an actor, and he wasn't really in pain. He was just pretending to be. Volunteer 2, the man delivering the shocks, was the one actually being observed. This study wasn't really about memory and learning. It was conducted to see how people responded to the demands of a person of authority in these kinds of situations, and the results are astonishing. No matter in how much pain Volunteer 1 appeared to be in, and no matter how much Volunteer 2 wanted to stop delivering the shocks, he kept delivering them because the researcher, in other words, the authority figure, told him to. Of course, the researcher is a normal human being like you and me, but if a man in a lab coat tells you to do something, no matter how unethical, how can you refuse? This is a very good example of the authority principle, the 5th weapon of influence. From a very young age, we are taught to listen to people of authority. Young children don't know much about the world, so listening to authority figures such as their parents and their teachers without questioning them too much is often a good thing. But the problem is that as they grow older, they get used to agreeing with authority figures without thinking too much about what they're actually saying. They become lazy thinkers and easier to influence and manipulate by people of authority. Even worse, they become easier to influence and manipulate by people who are simply dressed like a person of authority. People pretending to be someone they're not. This means that they can often end up agreeing with dumb ideas or end up doing dumb or unethical things, such as in the study that I just explained. Of course, very often, it does make sense to listen to authority figures. When a doctor prescribes a type 2 diabetic a medicine that will help him regulate his blood sugar, the smartest thing the patient can do is to listen to him. After all those years in medical school, it's the least he could do. But one should always ask himself if what the authority figure is saying makes sense, because often, it doesn't. In one particular case, a doctor gave one of the nurses a prescription instructing her to administer eardrops in a patient's right ear, as the patient had an ear infection. However, instead of writing right ear in the prescription he handed to the nurse, he abbreviated it so it said R ear, and without thinking too much about it, the nurse administered the eardrops in the patient's anus. There's no reason why a patient with an ear infection would need eardrops in his anus, but the nurse was just following orders. When we can't have something, it becomes more desirable to us, even if we had no desire for it when it was readily available. This is known as the scarcity principle, and when used properly, it can be a very powerful influencer. A few years ago, McDonald's started selling a pork sandwich dipped in barbecue sauce called the McRib. It didn't sell well. In fact, it was such a failure that McDonald's removed it from its menu. About a decade later, however, they decided to bring it back, and the demand for it is a lot higher than it used to be. So what changed? It wasn't the sandwich, that's for sure. It's the exact same thing that failed over a decade ago. What changed was that McDonald's made it scarce. It became difficult to find. It was only available in certain cities in certain months of the year. You could perhaps find it in Miami, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas in September, in Seattle, San Francisco, and Boston in October, and in New York, Tampa, and Portland in November. And this drove people mad. Someone even created an online McRib locator so that people would know where to find it. A relatively bad product became successful simply because people could no longer buy it, at least not as easily as they used to. Of course, this is just one example of the scarcity principle used correctly, but it's everywhere. The the person you liked that didn't like you back, the person who did like you that you didn't like until he or she started dating someone else, every limited edition product you've ever bought. Because these people weren't readily available, and because you knew that this product was no longer going to be available in due time, they became a lot more desirable to you. As always, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.